Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're winding the clock back nearly 1,000 years to one of the most pivotal moments in English history, the year 1066. This wasn't just a year of a single battle. It was a year of 3 kings, 2 invasions, and a seismic shift that would shape the future of a nation. So, grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's dive into the dramatic world-changing events of 1066. Our story begins in January 1066. The King of England, Edward the Confessor, dies without a clear heir. This creates a massive power vacuum. On his deathbed, Edward supposedly pointed to his most powerful nobleman, Harold Godwinson, and named him as his successor. The Witan, England's council of leading men, agreed. Just one day after Edward's funeral, Harold Godwinson was crowned King Harold II. It was a swift, decisive move to secure the throne. But in the medieval world, a crown was never that easy to hold. 2 other powerful men across the sea believed they had a stronger claim, and they weren't about to let Harold's coronation go unchallenged. The first challenger was a name you probably know, William, the Duke of Normandy. William claimed that years earlier, both King Edward and Harold himself had promised him the throne. According to the Normans, Harold had even sworn a sacred oath over holy relics to support William's claim. So, when Harold took the crown for himself, William saw it as a betrayal of the highest order. He immediately began planning an invasion, assembling a massive fleet and an army of knights in Normandy, just waiting for the right moment to cross the English Channel. But William wasn't the only threat. To the north, another formidable claimant was eyeing the English prize. This was Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, a legendary Viking warrior who had fought and plundered his way across Europe. Hardrada's claim was a bit more complex, based on an old agreement between a previous Danish King of England and a Norwegian king. More importantly, he had a powerful and rather surprising ally, Tostig Godwinson, King Harold of England's own exiled brother. Tostig, bitter after being removed from his position as Earl of Northumbria, joined forces with Hardrada, eager for revenge. So, King Harold was in an impossible position, facing 2 major invasion threats from 2 different directions, Normandy in the south and Norway in the north. Throughout the summer of 1066, all of England held its breath. King Harold knew the invasions were coming. He raised the Fyrd, the English militia made up of local farmers and landowners, and positioned his army along the southern coast, staring out at the English Channel, waiting for William's fleet to appear. For months, they waited and waited. The winds were against William. The Norman fleet couldn't sail. As the summer wore on, Harold's men grew restless. Their supplies were dwindling and harvest time was approaching. These were farmers, not professional soldiers. They needed to get back to their fields. In early September, with no sign of the Normans, Harold made a fateful decision. He disbanded his southern army. It was the worst possible timing. Just as Harold sent his men home, he received shocking news. Harald Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson had landed in the north of England with a massive Viking army. They sailed up the Humber River and marched towards the major northern city of York. The northern English earls, Edwin and Morcar, scrambled to assemble their forces to stop them. On September 20th, the 2 armies clashed at the Battle of Fulford Gate, just outside York. It was a brutal, bloody fight, but the experienced Viking warriors were too much for the English defenders. The battle was a disaster for the English, leaving the path to York wide open. The Vikings had won the first round. When King Harold, still in London, heard about the defeat at Fulford, he acted with incredible speed and determination. He knew he had to crush the Viking threat before William could invade from the south. In a move that has become legendary, Harold force-marched his army, the Housecarls, his professional elite troops, almost 200 miles north in just 4 days. It was an astonishing feat of endurance. He gathered fresh troops along the way and caught the Viking army completely by surprise. On September 25th, Harold's English army descended on the Norwegians at a place called Stamford Bridge. The Vikings were completely unprepared. Many had left their armor back on their ships, enjoying the warm weather. The battle that followed was one of the most savage in English history. According to legend, A single giant Viking berserker held the narrow bridge, cutting down dozens of Englishmen before he was finally brought down. The English army eventually broke through and utterly destroyed the Norwegian invaders. Both Harold Hardrada and Tostig Godwinson were killed in the fighting. It was a total, decisive victory for King Harold. He had defeated one of the most feared warriors in Europe and secured the north of England. He had eliminated one of the two threats to his crown. But there was no time to celebrate. Just 3 days after his stunning victory at Stamford Bridge, as Harold and his exhausted army were recovering in York, he received the news he had been dreading all year. The winds in the Channel had finally changed. William of Normandy and his army had landed at Pevensey Bay, on the southern coast of England. Harold's worst nightmare had come true. The southern coast was completely undefended. William's forces were now on English soil, burning villages and establishing a base of operations. Once again, Harold had to act. He turned his battered, weary army around and began another grueling forced march south to confront the Normans. The stage was set for the final decisive showdown. On the morning of October 14, 1066, the two armies faced each other on a ridge near the small town of Hastings. Harold's English army took up a strong defensive position at the top of the hill, forming a tightly packed shield wall. They were exhausted from their long marches and the battle at Stamford Bridge, but they held the high ground. William's Norman army, fresh and composed of cavalry, archers, and infantry, was at the bottom of the hill. The battle began around 9 a.m. and raged for the entire day. The Norman cavalry charged up the hill again and again, but they couldn't break the English shield wall. The English axes were devastating against the Norman horses and knights. For hours, it seemed like Harold's men might just hold on. The battle was a brutal stalemate. At one point, a rumor spread through the Norman ranks that William had been killed, and his army started to retreat. William himself had to ride among them, lifting his helmet to show he was alive and rally his troops. Then, the Normans employed a clever, or perhaps accidental, tactic. They would pretend to retreat, luring parts of the English shield wall to break formation and chase them down the hill. Once the English were exposed on level ground, the Norman knights would turn and cut them down. This tactic, repeated throughout the afternoon, began to weaken the English line. As evening approached, the battle reached its climax. The English were tired, their numbers thinning, but they were still fighting fiercely. Then, disaster struck. According to the Bayeux Tapestry, a stray arrow flew high into the air and struck King Harold in the eye. He fell, mortally wounded. With their king gone, the morale of the English army shattered. The shield wall broke, and the Normans surged up the hill, overwhelming the last pockets of resistance. By nightfall, the battle was over. The English army was destroyed, and their king lay dead on the field. William the Conqueror had won. On Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey, the very same place Harold had been crowned less than a year earlier, William, Duke of Normandy, was crowned King of England. The Anglo-Saxon era was over, and the Norman era had begun. The Battle of Hastings is one of history's greatest what-ifs. What if the wind hadn't kept William in Normandy all summer? What if Hardrada had never invaded? What if Harold had waited for reinforcements instead of rushing to Hastings? We'll never know. But what we do know is that this single day of battle changed England forever. It introduced a new ruling class, a new language, a new style of architecture, and a new political system that tied England more closely to mainland Europe. The events of 1066 are a dramatic tale of ambition, betrayal, and the sheer chance that shapes the course of history. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to 1066. I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. Let me know in the comments which historical event you'd like to see covered next. Until then, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.